Summer 1984. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Hayden Springs, a California suburb where perfectly manicured lawns stretched before houses that all seemed cut from the same architectural cloth. In this upper-middle-class enclave, crime was something that happened elsewhere, in the city, in other neighborhoods, to other families. 14-year-old Marcy Nolan checked her watch as she left Emma Patterson's house. 5:47 p.m. Still plenty of time to get home before her 6:30 dinner curfew. She adjusted the strap of her faded denim backpack, heavy with sketching supplies. Drawing was Marcy's escape, the one place where her quiet nature transformed into bold strokes across paper. "You sure you don't want a ride?" Emma's mother called from the doorway, car keys dangling from her fingers. "No thanks, Mrs. Patterson. It's just a few blocks." Marcy's voice was soft but carried a note of certainty. She'd taken this route dozens of times. "Suit yourself. Tell your mom I'll call her about the PTA meeting." Marcy nodded and headed down the sidewalk. At the intersection of Maple and Thornwood, she paused, looking down the conventional route that would take an extra 12 minutes, then at the shortcut through the vacant lot between Sandoval Drive and her own street. The choice seemed simple. The vacant lot was overgrown but well-trodden, a path worn through the tall grass by neighborhood kids who'd been using it as a passage for years. Construction equipment had appeared there last week, bright yellow machines sleeping like prehistoric beasts. The Whitakers had finally gotten approval for their swimming pool after months of neighborhood council debates. Marcy stepped into the lot, the sounds of suburban life fading behind her. A cicada buzzed nearby. She fingered the Girl Scout sash in her backpack, embroidered with badges she'd earned over 3 years. Her mother had asked her to bring it home to sew on her newest badge, photography. The sun dipped lower as Marcy crossed the midpoint of the lot. She'd later be described as sensible by teachers, responsible by family friends, and invisible until she wasn't by classmates who suddenly found her absence deafening. She was the type of girl who did her homework immediately after school, who never missed curfew, who kept her colored pencils arranged by shade. She never made it to dinner that night. Patricia Nolan glanced at the kitchen clock for the 12th time in 20 minutes. 7:05 p.m. Dinner was getting cold, and Robert, her husband, was moving from irritated to concerned. "She's never late," Patricia said, phone already in hand. "Not like this. Did you try Emma's house again?" Robert stood by the window, scanning the street as if he could manifest their daughter through sheer will. "Twice. Mrs. Patterson said she left before 6. Patricia's voice caught. "She said Marcy took the shortcut." The words hung in the air like a bad omen. By 8:30 p.m., the Nolans' living room had transformed into an impromptu command center. 2 police officers sat across from the parents, one taking notes while Detective James Harlow, a weathered man with tired eyes, asked questions in a voice too practiced at delivering bad news. "And she was wearing?" Harlow prompted. "A blue t-shirt with a butterfly design, jeans, white sneakers." Patricia's voice had taken on a mechanical quality, as if speaking about a stranger rather than her only child. "Her backpack is navy blue with a small pin of a palette on the front zipper." Officer Sandoval, the younger of the 2 policemen, stepped back into the room after checking the perimeter of the property. "No sign of her out back or in the immediate vicinity." "What about the vacant lot?" Robert asked. "That's her shortcut home." "We did a quick sweep," Sandoval replied. "It's pretty dark now, but we'll do a proper search at first light." Detective Harlow nodded. "In the meantime, we'll put out an alert and check with any registered offenders in the area." He lowered his voice. "I understand this is difficult, but I need to ask, has Marcy ever run away before? Any fights? Trouble at school?" The question hung in the air until Robert shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. Marcy is," he caught himself, "Marcy would never." The next morning, yellow police tape cordoned off the vacant lot, transforming what had been neighborhood property into a crime scene. Officers in uniform walked in measured lines across the property, eyes scanning the ground. Local volunteers gathered on the periphery, eager to join the search that had already spread to the surrounding 5-mile radius. Alice Weber, who lived across from the vacant lot, approached Detective Harlow as he supervised the search. "I heard something," she said, her voice barely audible. "Last night, around dusk." Harlow turned his full attention to her. "What did you hear, Mrs. Weber?" "A scream." She hugged her cardigan closer despite the morning heat. "Just one. I thought it might have been kids playing, you know how they get. But it was different. A girl screaming." Harlow's expression shifted. "Why didn't you report this last night?" "I wasn't certain," she admitted. "And then I saw all the commotion at the Nolan's house and..." She trailed off. Harlow called over a uniformed officer. "Get Mrs. Weber's full statement." He turned back to her. "What time was this, exactly?" "Around 6:15, I think. Just as I was starting to make dinner." The timing aligned perfectly with Marcy's disappearance. As the day progressed, the search expanded. Helicopters hovered overhead, K-9 units sniffed through nearby woods, and officers knocked on every door within a 3-mile radius. One officer took particular interest in the construction equipment in the lot. "When was this delivered?" he asked Mark Whitaker, who stood behind the police tape with his wife Diane and teenage son Eli. "Last Thursday," Mark replied. "They're starting excavation for our pool next week." The officer made a note. "Was anyone operating this equipment yesterday evening?" "Between 5 and 7. The Whitakers exchanged glances and shook their heads. "Everything was locked up after the contractors left around 4, Mark said. Eli, 17 and lanky with a perpetual slouch, stared at the scene with an unreadable expression. "I saw her sometimes," he offered suddenly. "Marcy. Cutting through here on her way home from school." Detective Harlow, who had been passing by, paused. "You knew Marcy well?" Eli shrugged. "Not really. We go to different schools. I just noticed her. She always looked, at the ground when she walked. Like she was searching for something." Harlow studied the teenager. "Were you home yesterday evening?" "Yeah. In my room. Working on college applications." "Anyone confirm that?" "I was here," Diane interjected quickly. "I brought him a sandwich around 6. As the detective moved on, he made a note to follow up with the Whitaker boy. Something about his demeanor didn't sit right, that detached tone, the way he'd corrected himself about Marcy's habits, as if he'd watched her often enough to know. The local news vans arrived by noon, transforming a missing persons case into a spectacle. Patricia Nolan, eyes hollow with fear, appeared on camera to plead for her daughter's return. Robert stood beside her, a silent pillar of barely contained panic. "Please," Patricia's voice broke. "She's only 14. She's a good girl. If anyone has seen her or knows anything, please come forward." The broadcast sent ripples through Hayden Springs. Suddenly, everyone had a theory. The mail carrier recalled a van that had been parked on Sandoval Drive for 2 days but was now gone. A teacher remembered Marcy talking to an older student after school once. A neighbor mentioned a transient who had been spotted sleeping in the park 3 blocks away. Detective Harlow followed every lead methodically, a growing sense of dread building with each passing hour. The first 48 hours were crucial in missing persons cases, especially with minors, and they were rapidly approaching that threshold. By nightfall, the search of the vacant lot had yielded nothing but a silver barrette that Patricia couldn't confirm belonged to her daughter and footprints too numerous and overlapping to isolate any single path. Alice Weber's statement about the scream was filed but deprioritized as the investigation focused on a transient man who had been seen in the area. The man was located 2 days later in a neighboring town, questioned thoroughly, and ultimately released for lack of evidence. The community rallied around the Nolans. Vigils were held, flyers were distributed, and a reward fund quickly reached $15,000. A psychic brought in by Channel 7 News claimed Marcy was near water but couldn't specify where, a detail that sent search teams combing through drainage ditches and the reservoir 10 miles away. Meanwhile, construction permits for the Whitakers' pool were temporarily suspended out of respect, though no one seriously considered the vacant lot as a crime scene after the initial sweep. The focus had shifted elsewhere. 2 weeks into the investigation, leads had dried up. Marcy's case was still active but resources were being gradually reallocated. The FBI had consulted but found no connection to any known offenders. The media coverage waned, reduced to occasional updates reminding viewers that Marcy Nolan was still missing. 6 weeks after Marcy's disappearance, the county removed the restrictions on the Whitakers' construction permit. Life in Hayden Springs had resumed its normal rhythm, though the Nolans' house remained a place where neighbors lowered their voices when passing. Mark Whitaker approached the Nolans on a Sunday afternoon, his manner awkward but sincere. "The contractors are ready to start on the pool," he explained. "I wanted to let you know before you saw the equipment move in. We can postpone further if..." Robert Nolan cut him off with a raised hand. "You've been more than patient, Mark. We appreciate it, but you shouldn't have to put your lives on hold indefinitely." Patricia said nothing, her gaze fixed on the vacant lot visible from their kitchen window. She'd spent countless hours staring at it, as if the overgrown grass might suddenly reveal what had happened to her daughter. The next day, excavation began. The police had not deemed it necessary to conduct additional searches. The focus of the investigation had long since moved beyond the immediate vicinity of the neighborhood. As summer faded into fall, the pool was completed, an elegant kidney-shaped structure surrounded by freshly laid concrete decking. The Whitakers hosted a subdued neighborhood gathering to inaugurate it, though they had the sensitivity not to call it a celebration. The Nolans did not attend. The case went cold. August 2019. 35 years had passed since Marcy Nolan vanished. Hayden Springs had grown, absorbed by the expanding boundaries of the nearest city. The neighborhood itself remained largely unchanged, a testament to suburban resilience, though the trees were taller and the houses showed signs of decades of habitation. The Whitakers, now in their 70s, had decided to sell their home and move to a retirement community in Arizona. Their son Eli had long since moved to Oregon, where he had established himself as a respected physical therapist. "The pool is a liability," Mark explained to Douglas Reeves, the contractor they'd hired. "The foundation has cracked, and it's more cost-effective to remove it entirely than to repair it. Buyers these days want yards for their children, not maintenance headaches." Douglas surveyed the pool, which had aged poorly despite regular upkeep. "It'll take about a week to demolish and fill in. We'll have to break up the concrete and haul it away before we can level the ground." Work began the following Monday. The jackhammers rattled the peace of the neighborhood, their persistent drone a soundtrack to the dismantling of a structure that had stood for over 3 decades. On the second day, one of the workers called Douglas over with an urgency that cut through the mechanical noise. "Boss, you need to see this." Douglas approached the partially demolished pool deck. The worker pointed to an area they had just broken through. Beneath the concrete was a depression in the earth, roughly 6 feet long, 4 feet wide. "That isn't part of the pool structure," Douglas said, frowning. "Stop work in this section." As they carefully removed more concrete, the unmistakable gleam of bone became visible. Douglas immediately ordered all work stopped and called the police. Detective Samantha Reyes arrived within the hour. Unlike James Harlow, who had retired 20 years earlier, Reyes was in her early 40s with sharp eyes that missed little. She took one look at the emerging shapes beneath the concrete and called for a forensic team. "How long has this pool been here?" she asked Mark, who stood ashen-faced at the edge of his property. "Since 1984, he replied. "Late summer." Something flickered in Reyes's memory. She had grown up in Hayden Springs, had been just a child when. "The Nolan girl," she said suddenly. "She disappeared around here, didn't she?" Mark's face drained of what little color remained. Yes. She was last seen near this lot. But the police searched it. They didn't find anything. Before or after the pool was installed? Reyes asked. Before, Mark whispered. God help us, before. The exhumation took 3 days. Forensic anthropologists worked meticulously to preserve every fragment, every fiber of evidence. What they uncovered told a story that had been literally buried for decades. The skeleton was small, consistent with a young teenage girl. It was positioned in a fetal curl, as if the victim had been attempting to protect herself even in death. Around the remains were traces of fabric that had partially decomposed but remained identifiable, denim consistent with jeans, cotton from what might have been a t-shirt, and most damning of all, a decayed but recognizable Girl Scout sash. The skull showed evidence of blunt force trauma to the back of the head. Whether that had been the cause of death would require further analysis, but it was clearly no accident. DNA testing confirmed what everyone had already suspected: the remains were those of Marcy Nolan. The news spread through Hayden Springs like wildfire. The community that had slowly forgotten Marcy was forced to confront her memory once more. The discovery raised disturbing questions. How had her body ended up beneath the pool? Why hadn't the initial search found evidence of disturbed earth? Who had silenced the artistic, quiet girl who never missed curfew? Patricia Nolan had passed away in 2011, never knowing what had happened to her daughter. Robert, now 83 and residing in a nursing home, was informed of the discovery by Detective Reyes personally. I always knew she was close, he said, tears tracking down weathered cheeks. I felt it. All these years. Detective Reyes reopened the case with vigor, diving into dusty archives to retrieve the original files. What she found troubled her deeply. The investigation in 1984 had been cursory at best, focused primarily on the transient and a few half-hearted interviews with Marcy's friends. The Whitaker property had been searched only superficially before construction began. Most disturbing was a statement tucked away in the back of the file, never followed up on. Alice Weber had reported hearing a girl screaming near the vacant lot at dusk on the night Marcy disappeared. The report was dated, signed, and then apparently forgotten. Alice had died in 2002, taking any additional details with her. Reyes pulled the construction permits for the pool. Work had begun exactly 2 months after Marcy's disappearance. The timing was suspicious, just long enough for the most intense phase of the search to conclude, but not so long as to raise eyebrows about the project's delay. She turned her attention to the Whitaker family. Mark and Diane expressed horror at the discovery and cooperated fully, allowing officers to search their home, including the attic and storage spaces they hadn't accessed in years. Eli Whitaker presented a more complex target. Now 52, he had built a life far from Hayden Springs. When contacted by Detective Reyes, he expressed shock but agreed to return to California for questioning. I barely knew her, Eli insisted during his interview. I was 17. She was 14. We went to different schools, moved in different circles. You told Detective Harlow that you noticed her passing through the lot, Reyes countered. Said she looked at the ground when she walked, like she was searching for something. That's a detailed observation of someone you barely knew. Eli's face tightened. I was an observant kid. Doesn't make me a murderer. Reyes let the silence stretch between them before asking, where were you between 5:45 and 6:30 p.m. on July 17, 1984? I told the original detective. I was home, in my room. My mother brought me a sandwich around 6. Your mother. Who loved you and would do anything to protect you. Eli leaned forward. Are you suggesting my mother lied to cover for me? That's absurd. The interview continued for hours, but Eli maintained his innocence with unwavering conviction. He provided DNA samples willingly and agreed to stay in town until further notice. Meanwhile, Reyes delved deeper into the original investigation. She tracked down Emma Patterson, now a professor of literature at a university 3 states away. Marcy was drawing something that day, Emma recalled during their phone conversation. She wouldn't show me. Said it wasn't ready. She was very private about her art until she felt it was finished. Do you remember anything else unusual about that day? Anything at all? Emma was silent for a moment. There was a boy watching us from across the street when we walked home from school. I remember because Marcy noticed him first and got weird about it. Quiet, even for her. This boy, can you describe him? Tall. Dark hair. I didn't know him, but Marcy seemed to. She just said, "That's Eli. He goes to Jefferson." Then she changed the subject. Reyes felt a chill. This directly contradicted Eli's claim that he and Marcy moved in different circles. She pressed further. Did Marcy ever mention Eli at any other time? Once, Emma said slowly, as if retrieving a long-buried memory. She showed me a poem someone had written her. It was intense. Something about her eyes being like windows to another world, and how he wanted to climb through them. We laughed about it, but I remember Marcy seemed uncomfortable. She said Eli had given it to her when they ran into each other at the library. The conversation gave Reyes a new direction. She obtained a search warrant for the Whitakers' home, focusing on any remaining belongings from Eli's youth. In the attic, tucked in a dusty corner, officers found boxes of high school memorabilia labeled Eli, School. Inside one box, beneath calculus tests and term papers, was a leather-bound journal. The entries were sporadic, often mundane reflections on teenage life. But scattered throughout were references to increasingly obsessive observations about her habits, her appearance, her movements through the neighborhood. An entry from July 16, 1984, read, "Saw M again today. She pretends not to notice me, but I know she does. Tomorrow I'll make her acknowledge me." And then, most damningly, a short entry dated July 18, the day after Marcy's disappearance. "No one will ever dig deep enough." Reyes brought this evidence to the district attorney, who agreed it was suspicious but insufficient for an arrest warrant. The journal never explicitly mentioned violence, and the phrase, "dig deep enough," could be interpreted multiple ways. "We need more," the DA said. Physical evidence linking him directly to the crime scene. Forensic testing of the remains had yielded partial fingerprints from the Girl Scout sash that had been preserved in the soil beneath the concrete. They were running the prints through the system, but after 35 years, the chances of a match were slim. The case took an unexpected turn when Mark Whitaker requested a private meeting with Detective Reyes. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something I've carried for too long." Reyes leaned forward, recorder running. "I'm listening, Mr. Whitaker." "The night before we poured the concrete for the pool, I went out to check on the excavation. It was late, maybe midnight. I noticed the ground in one section looked different. Disturbed, like it had been recently dug up and repacked." "What did you do?" Reyes asked, barely breathing. "Nothing." Mark's voice cracked. "I told myself it was just the construction crew being sloppy. But there was this smell. I convinced myself it was just the turned earth, maybe something rotting naturally in the soil." "Did you mention this to anyone?" "Your wife." "The contractors?" Mark shook his head. "The next morning, I went to check again, and the area had been smoothed over. I thought I'd imagined it. And later that day, they poured the concrete." "Was Eli home that night? When you checked the excavation?" Mark's eyes filled with tears. "I thought he was. In his room. But when I came back inside, I heard the shower running. It was after midnight." The information was compelling but still circumstantial. Reyes needed something definitive to link Eli to the crime scene. She returned to the original evidence, combing through Marcy's recovered belongings. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The Girl Scout sash, preserved by the chemical composition of the soil, still had several badges attached. As forensic technicians carefully cleaned each one, they discovered something behind the photography badge, a small scrap of paper tucked into the folded fabric of the sash itself. On it, in faded but legible ink, was written, "If anything happens to me, it was Eli. He won't leave me alone." The note was dated July 17, 1984, the day Marcy disappeared. Handwriting analysis confirmed it matched Marcy's writing samples from school records. The district attorney issued an arrest warrant for Eli Whitaker the same day. When confronted with the note, Eli's careful composure finally cracked. "She was going to tell everyone about us," he said, his voice hollow. "I just wanted to talk to her, to explain. I didn't mean to hit her so hard." In his subsequent confession, Eli revealed that he had become obsessed with Marcy, convincing himself they shared a special connection. When she threatened to show his messages to her parents and school counselor, he confronted her in the vacant lot. The conversation escalated, and in a moment of rage, he struck her with a rock. "I panicked," he said. "I buried her there because I didn't know what else to do. When my parents announced they were building the pool weeks later, it seemed like fate." Despite the confession, the district attorney struggled to build a case that would stand up in court. The confession alone, coming 35 years after the fact, wasn't enough. The physical evidence had degraded, the note could be challenged by defense attorneys as potentially planted, and many of the original witnesses had died. In the end, the DA decided to offer a plea deal. Eli Whitaker pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 15 years, a fraction of the time Marcy had spent beneath the concrete. The Nolan family, represented now by cousins and distant relatives, sued the town for negligence in the original investigation. They settled out of court for an undisclosed sum, which they used to establish a scholarship fund in Marcy's name for young artists. A year after the discovery, a small plaque was installed near the local park, bearing Marcy's photograph and the words, "For Marcy, may the truth always surface." But in Hayden Springs, questions lingered. Had Diane Whitaker known more than she admitted about her son's involvement? Why had the original detective not pursued Alice Weber's report about the scream? How had no one noticed the freshly turned earth during construction? And most troubling of all, how many other secrets lay buried beneath the manicured lawns and pristine facades of suburban America, waiting for time and circumstance to bring them to light? For those who remembered Marcy, the quiet, artistic girl who never missed curfew, justice had come too late. But as Detective Reyes often reminded herself, better late than never. In the end, the truth had surfaced, just as Marcy herself had finally emerged from her concrete tomb, curled in eternal silence but speaking volumes about the darkness that sometimes lurks in the most unexpected places.